adults don't sit around and have a glass of milk, but they actually did 30 or 40 years ago. For maybe 10 years, they thought, don't worry, millennials will grow into it. As they get older, they'll drink more. And it's turned out they haven't. I see a lot of organisations almost invest into the past. Are we investing for the consumer that will be there in 5 or 10 years? Or are we investing for today's consumer? If you're a construction company right now, you're a developer, you're actually making a 30-year bet on how people live. A second harbour bridge. We're making a bet about what we think transport looks like in 30 years.
Melissa Clark-Reynolds,
the street smart futurist,
CEO, founder and independent board director of Weta Workshop and Beef Plus Lamb New Zealand.
former deputy chair of the Radio New Zealand board.
Appointed an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit in 2015 for services to the technology industry.
The electric fence halter, which is a New Zealand business that has just got $1 billion investment in it, that does what I call Fitbits for cows. Our tractors will be autonomous, running on solar power. They'll just be laser zapping weeds.
As a street smart futurist, what sort of conversations are you having in the boardrooms that is like intel, like tell us what's going on behind the scenes? You have full access to that. What's the convo right now?
I think there's a few conversations going on, and one of them is that actually
Today's episode is brought to you by AcademyEx, New Zealand's premier postgraduate institute for business owners and professionals. They're an absolute game changer for New Zealand business owners and professionals who are ready to stop talking about the next level and actually build the skills to get there. You can hit the link below or scan the QR code on your screen to learn more about AcademyEx. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Good to have you. I want to find out, why should someone click on this episode and watch till the very end?
I think because we all want to know what's going to happen next. And today we're going to focus on what's going to happen next.
When you talk about focusing on what's going to happen next, what do you really mean?
I mean that I work with boards and I sit in boardrooms, and we're spending a lot of time at the moment thinking about what does the next 10 years of our business look like. And so today we're going to talk a bit about how I think about business for the next 10 years, what I'm seeing coming at companies for the next 10 years, and what boards can do about it.
Quite a fascinating conversation, and you're a very fascinating person. We've just played a trailer about you now, so people have an idea of who you are. We will get to who you are in a moment. I would love to understand, as a futurist, as a street smart futurist, what sort of conversations are you having in the boardrooms that is like intel, like tell us what's going on behind the scenes? Like this is what I really wanted to ask you when I first—
The juicy bits.
The juicy bit. So let's begin. Like if someone listening thinking, yeah, well, I have a business, I'm making lots of money, I want to know what other boardrooms are talking about. You have full access to that. Without obviously telling us what you cannot tell us. Can you tell us? What's the convo right now?
I think there's a few conversations going on, and one of them is that actually there are some companies that are making a lot of money. There's a lot of companies at the moment that aren't making a lot of money, and we can see in New Zealand that we're at really high levels of liquidations. Almost half of those, I think, are in the construction sector.
Yeah.
And then we've seen hospo really take a big hit across the country. We've seen valuations for property go down in most of the country, but not all of it. So I see that it's a time with quite a bit of stress, plus unemployment is up.
Right.
And so two of the things that boards are thinking about are related to the solvency issue is, are my suppliers going to stay solvent? Are my customers going to stay solvent? And related to that, a few years ago, we saw that employees were off. They were churning quite a lot. Now with unemployment, the rate that it is, and the fear that we see in employees, a lot of staff surveys are coming back, and the staff are wondering if the business will be there in 2 years. And so we see then with employees, some of them feel like they're hostages. And I am using this word hostage, like they're afraid to leave the company because where they might go might not survive. But they're also staying perhaps in a job they don't love at the moment because they're afraid to go. So we're seeing that. And then the solvency piece, if you've got quite a bit of money at the moment, you're really faced with the question of where do I invest that money? so that I get a better return in the future. And it might be a better return outside the business core or it's inside the business core. And so I'm pretty interested in how do we invest in the business to set it up for the next 10 years.
Could you give me a snapshot of what the kind of businesses or companies that you are a board member of?
Yeah, so I'm on the board at Atkins Ranch, which is a lamb company. You're not supposed to have favourites, but it is my favourite. And I've been on that board for 5 years. We export premium lamb to the US. And it's quite niche, but it's highly profitable. It's highly profitable because we work very hard at that profit. And we're determined to pay farmers well for the lamb that they produce for us, and we're very demanding in the specifications we require for that lamb. And then we sell that on to very high-end demanding customers in the US. And to turn it the other way, we fundamentally ask demanding customers what they want, and then we grow and produce that.
Interesting. So you talk to your market first.
We talk to our market first, which is quite different than a lot of the rest of the New Zealand meat industry, which I think grows product and then figures out how to flog it off.
Yes, of course.
So we're quite different. So that's Atkins. I've recently joined the board of Squirrel, and I absolutely adore that. What I see with Squirrel is that it's a very dynamic financial services business, has a founder or a couple of founders that sit in the business and have seen that they've taken it to a certain level, and now they've brought in a professional independent board. And I'm really excited about where that goes, what that looks like, the future of banking and the future of finance and the future of home lending are all up for grabs at the moment.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is it? How so?
Well, it's all changing. I think banks have been able to play the same game for a couple of 100 years. They might have put a bit of a web interface on it or an app on your phone, but they fundamentally run the same business that they ran 200 years ago.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
They haven't actually reinvented themselves. They've slightly digitized. And so we see the growth globally of different ways of doing payments. You know, I have a Wise account, for example, which helps me to move money around internationally. I used to use PayPal, and then Wise is just so much better. I have a card I can use. We see these different ways of doing financing. In New Zealand, we saw the growth of Sharesies, for example. Sharesies where they can fractionalise shares. People can put their money in there. Sharesies is expanded to KiwiSaver and other kinds of financial products. And someone like Squirrel, you know, we fractionalise mortgages, and so people can invest in the mortgage market through Squirrel. Equally, we help people to get a mortgage, and then we also have some products that are for developers or for high net worth wholesale investors, where they can invest directly into the more risky end of the property market.
Very
Quite
exciting.
different to a bank.
Very exciting and very different to the lamb industry.
Totally. And then the last board that I'm on at the moment is Araake. Araake sadly just got defunded in the latest budget in terms of its government contribution.
For those people who don't know.
Yeah, so Araake is it's basically was there to invest co-funding into startups who are working to transition the New Zealand economy off petroleum products and into future energy. So it could be we've invested into hydrogen cells for aeroplanes. We've invested into looking at different ways of doing smart grids. So a whole bunch of things that help to basically decarbonise the New Zealand economy. So that's it's been defunded. So we're in a wind down phase at the moment.
Okay.
And again, I think it's good boards. We often think it's easy to be on a board when a business is cranking. You really find out whether a board is high performing or not when it's under stress.
Mm-hmm. So. And you've been on many other boards in the past.
I have. I recently
left.
How
many have you been?
A lot. I don't even know. I don't.
Can't even count.
Earlier this year, I left the board of Weta Workshop. I like those private companies. I like those founder-driven companies that have grown quite fast. And Atkins is one of those in a way as well. I'm first independent in there. And I like businesses where somebody's had an idea, they've managed to corral some other people to join them, and they've grown. And sometimes it's family businesses. Not all directors like those businesses, but I like them when they're a little messy. We might have Atkins, we've got a father and a son on that board.
Yeah.
On, a number of the boards I've been on, like Weta, where you've got the founders in the room on the board.
Yep.
And it does change the dynamic. You mentioned street smart. I think street smart board members are the ones who tend to really enjoy those founder-driven or family-owned businesses, and they operate quite differently than public companies.
Very interesting. So I want to understand and dive deeper into the conversations that you're having within these boards. As a futurist, certified futurist, you have a different perspective. So when you're sitting down along the table with everybody else and they go, Melissa, what do you think about this $1 million that we have to spend?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? What do you say?
I'm often asking, are we investing for a product that already exists or is in the past?
Exactly.
Like I see a lot of organizations almost invest into the past. And rather, I want to know, are we investing for where the market will be in 10 years or 5 years? Are we investing for the consumer that will be there in 5 or 10 years? Or are we investing for today's consumer?
Yep.
And I often see that businesses are investing to play catch up rather than to truly develop new business. So I'm also fascinated by how the business creates value and what will that value be for a customer in 5 or 10 years.
You've mentioned heaps of things, so I want to slow it down. So talking about where do we put our money into, what product or service? I think it's many more products that are going to be in the future, there's a demand for it in the future. So are you seeing that companies are building something for now?
All the time.
Really?
All the time.
Okay.
I'm seeing it when they digitized. What they often did is they took their old ways of doing things and they put some tech over it.
Can you give us an example from maybe previous boards that you've been on, or maybe even the current ones, if you're allowed to talk about it?
Well, I'll give you, if I come back to banking for a minute.
Yeah, good.
It feels to me that banks are putting in lots of cybersecurity, which they're doing. But I'm already making AI agents of myself and sending those AI agents out to deal with customer service issues that I can't be bothered with. So I send an AI agent out to Air New Zealand, for example. I've been looking at the banks or looking at the telcos or looking at Air New Zealand. I don't believe they have really thought about optimizing their chatbots for a chatbot to talk to them. And yet that will be coming in no time. If I'm already doing it, then that's already a wedge of consumers that will start to do that.
So chatbot to human is what everyone is doing right now?
Right, but they're not doing chatbot to chatbot.
Chatbot to chatbot. This is what you're thinking.
I am. And I'm thinking 2016 was when what we called APIs, so from a tech point of view, the ability for software to talk to other software.
Yeah.
That became more traffic on the internet than humans talking on the internet. And if we look back like that, we can see these patterns. And I'm picking that within 5 years, chatbot to chatbot will be more of the internet traffic than the software to software or human to chatbot traffic.
Okay. Is that the Internet of Things?
The Internet of Things is slightly different. I used to be on a board up here in Auckland called Alfreo, which was another company that I think is a fantastic company. And what it does is it has this Internet of Things proposition. It manages from Auckland fridges all over South America that have like Coca-Cola and Pepsi in them.
Yeah.
And what they can do is using the Internet of Things, they can tell how many times does this fridge door get opened in a supermarket or in a petrol station. When does the Coca-Cola need to be cold? Like when is it selling? Maybe you don't need to run the electricity all night because nobody's buying Coke in the middle of the night because the supermarket's closed. So you can use Internet of Things to do things like manage energy. Can use Internet of Things to manage maintenance, and we're seeing quite a lot of that. John Deere is one of my favourite companies, and what they do is they use Internet of Things that when their tractors break down, the tractor sends a message back to the warehouse and asks for the part to be delivered now, rather than a farmer having to take the tractor into town to get fixed.
Very interesting.
So it's slightly different to Internet of Things, but Internet of Things is growing at a great rate too.
For those who don't understand what Internet of Things, we're just going to back a little bit. From your own definition, what is it?
The Internet of Things for me is like having hardware, like it might be a fridge or a tractor that is connected to the internet, but it's not that smart. It's not like it's going to go into a Google search or something. It's connected to the internet for an analytics about how it's performing, for being able to do maintenance or predictive maintenance. So it usually only has maybe a small bundle, half a dozen tasks that this internet connection does. It could be location. It could be has somebody installed this equipment in the right place at the right time. And
you can measure stuff remotely.
So here from Auckland, our Frio can tell exactly what's going on with fridges all over South America.
Very exciting.
Yeah, very exciting. And it means that we're able from New Zealand to develop very cool new products that can be deployed all over the world and managed from here.
So Internet of Things is different to the term that you were using earlier?
Yeah, so when I think about, APIs is just software talking to each other. Yep. And then now what we call it agent-to-agent communication, which is this chatbot to chatbot. Yeah. And that is moving at a great rate. And some boards are thinking about it.
Because when is that happening? It's
happening now. It's happening in banking, it's happening in finance, it's happening in I'm sending a chatbot to talk to the chatbot at Air New Zealand because I find it so painful. I don't want to sit there and deal with it. We'll see. There's a dating app in the States called Voila, and that one I would make an AI of myself. Yeah. The other person would make an AI of themselves. The AIs go on a date and you find out whether or not you're worth the Uber fare and the coffee across town. That's what I mean. Like that is
like just an assistant data.
It's like an assistant dating, but it's like I send my digital twin off on the date. They send their digital twin. We find out, whether we've got any compatibility without having to meet. And I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm just saying that if you look around, happening. What I do is I'm looking around, and I'm going, if these use cases already exist, they're just going to explode over the next 5 years.
And into so many other areas. So this is only one thing that you've noticed, which is chatbots. So what else are people investing or companies are investing in that is, I don't know, like, obviously you're saying that a lot of companies aren't putting their money into old stuff that's not going to exist in 5 years.
Well, I think, I look at AI and a lot of boards are starting to change a little now, but a lot of boards started out by writing policies about how not to use AI. They were so concerned about governing the risks of AI. They didn't think enough about the opportunities of AI. And then the flip, I feel, has happened lately, which is that we see CEOs and boards are over-optimistic about the productivity gains that the AI tools will give them. I saw a recent survey that showed that there was a 30% gap between what the CEs thought was possible and what the staff using the tools thought was possible. Mm-hmm. And so I'm seeing quite a bit of that in the boardroom, where people who don't have a lot of experience with these tools, they might use ChatGPT or they might use Copilot, and they suddenly think, gosh, we could get 20 or 30% improvement in productivity out of the staff by making them all use AI. And yet the reality that we're seeing is that those tools are not as well developed as they need to be. And quite a few companies that have laid off staff ahead of productivity are now rehiring them. So I see there's a real knowledge gap in the boardroom about the reality of AI versus the hype of AI, and also that they don't necessarily understand how it works, and that there are a lot of other tools out there, not just the sort of Copilot or ChatGPT, which is what I think most board members are using and therefore think is AI.
If today's chat has you thinking about how your business needs to deploy software or AI to scale revenue and save time, but your team lacks the technical know-how, AcademyEx can bridge that gap for you. Now, they've launched a new 12-week training program that is focused entirely on hands-on AI software development. This isn't a shallow prompt engineering workshop. You take a real business concept and carry it from a rough idea through a live working application or tool. You will learn to use modern tools like AI coding assistants, handle real design requirements, and experience vibe coding to deploy a working build. It is a genuine development curriculum designed for modern business leaders. So scan the QR code on the screen or hit the link in the description to learn more about this program. And don't delay because applications close the 10th of September. Quick one. If you're an established business owner who already knows podcast guesting is one of the smartest moves for your business, you want to be on podcasts, but you're too busy. You don't know what to pitch, how to pitch, what to say once you're on the microphone, and you just need some help. I made something for you. It's called 3 Free Podcasts. I will personally send you 3 shows your ideal clients are already listening to, plus exactly how to land a guest spot on each one. Simply go to powerfully.com/Mina, enter your details, a few questions about yourself, and then you will get the email. That is powerfully.com/Mina. What's the difference between the CEs and the employees?
So that's where the CEs was that 30%. I think the CEs are also not using the tools as much.
Oh, okay.
The CEs are using these large language models perhaps, but they're not thinking, so if I come back, I started working on AI in the 80s. And the reason I did it is I was wanting to work with very large data sets and I was wanting to use them to predict things. And back then, that was quite hard going. What we've seen is 5 different ways of thinking about like the philosophy almost under AI over the last sort of 50 years. And these LLMs that we're using now, that stands for a large language model. For anyone who already knows all this, just humour me for a sec. But what they basically are is they're kind of fancy autocomplete. Why they're able to work today is we've got a good 30 to 40 years of data available on the internet. So people have been posting their photos and their recipes and their music and articles about things and books and so on. And so there's just this like ridiculously huge, like inconceivably large repository of human knowledge and not so much knowledge, but, human creation and knowledge available. So you hold that thought for 1 minute. The other thing that's happened is it may not feel like it, but the cost of energy relative to income has been plummeting over the last 10 years. And the biggest impact on that has been solar power. And so when you get cheap energy and an enormous amount of data, these models that basically mine, in a sense, the data that's available on the internet to understand what humans think, what humans have done, what does a human look like, becomes possible in a way that it couldn't before. And so these large language models at this point, what they fundamentally do is they go out to the internet and they look for the average of the answer to the question you asked it. And so people think, I'm getting these genius answers back. But they need to understand that the answer they're getting is the average of what knowledge is available on the internet. It's not creating anything new. It's just telling you what has already been created by human beings.
Yeah.
And that's an important thing, and many board members don't understand that because they put something into ChatGPT or into Copilot or into Claude or something, and they get back what looks like something super smart. And it probably is super smart, but it's super smart based on an average of everybody else out there.
And when you say average, meaning it's the collective of 5 answers?
Or 500,000 answers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. 500,000. And then 50% said yes, 50% said no. So the answer would be?
Maybe.
Oh, okay. I see.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
But if 51% said yes and the sky is green, it's probably going to come back and tell you the sky is green.
But it's not quite accurate.
But it's not quite accurate. And actually, interestingly, it's becoming less accurate over time. So partly, I want to talk about accuracy. Like the more AI-created content there now is on the internet, AI is indexing that as well.
Right.
And adding that to its averaging. So
right.
curiously, like there are tools, and I use some very specialized LLM tools.
What do you use?
So I use, for example, one I use is called Undermined. It's a research tool that only looks at like peer-reviewed research and academic research.
Mm-hmm.
And it coaches me to ask a research question. So I wouldn't use it to say, tell me if the sky is green. But I would use it to ask a complicated question about whether a particular treatment might work, or what is the research that's available on this particular vaccine and safety or something.
Mm-hmm.
And what I then do is I ask it to find me that, and then I ask it to find me everybody who has argued against it.
Okay.
And then I'll ask it to make me a table that puts all of the arguments for and all the arguments against.
Right.
And I ask it not to synthesize. Because if I'd put that into ChatGPT or Claude or something, it would have given me an answer that was synthesized.
So just find the raw data.
I just want the raw data.
Okay.
But I'm also interested if there's any trends in that data or if there's any insights from it. So I know it was a very long answer, but this idea of the average, people need to understand it's the average.
So I want to find the impact of that on the boardroom and on
the impact on that in the boardroom is that I'm seeing a couple of things. I'm seeing board members put their papers into AI and then asking the AI to tell them what's the summary. And then the second bit is what are the questions I should ask in the boardroom based on these papers. And they're usually not wrong or stupid. But to me, the point of being a board member is that I read that in detail and I bring my wisdom with the wisdom of the crowd, the wisdom of the other board members who are different to me, to a discussion. And it's not the answer that the board is looking for. It's really great questions. So on one hand, maybe Claude would give me great questions, but also I feel like that's actually what I'm there for. I'm there to have a conversation with other board members about what the future might look like or what is interesting or what the company should do. I don't really think that board members should be outsourcing that.
Very interesting. So you would have to go through the 200-page manually.
I do. Yeah. And I often read them 2 or 3 times because I really want to be all over it because that's the value that I add as a board member. If you only need to put it into Claude or something, why have a board? The point of the board to me is diversity of thinking, disparate views, good conversation.
Yeah, that's very good. So we talked about a number of things about the board and what they're grappling with. And you did mention a bit about what they grapple with. A lot of the questions is, I know a lot about the subject, so I'm not going to say. I'll let you say it.
That's right.
What are they grappling with right now? What are the questions they're having, and how are you helping them adapt by keeping the future in mind without living in the future the whole time? Because you're always still in the present.
Yeah. I think this question about who are our consumers in 5 or 10 years and what do they want is really important. And related to that is how do they live? So if we look back 5 or 10 years, especially 10, I think, there's a number of ways we live today that could have been predicted but can feel like they weren't mainstream. I'll give you an example. Podcasting wasn't mainstream 10 years ago, but there were podcasts.
Yep.
And working from home wasn't mainstream. But 10 years ago, I ran a global software company where we did 24-hour development with handovers, between teams, and people worked from home. So it wasn't that it was impossible 10 years ago. It just wasn't common. I could probably think of a whole bunch of other things. The things we eat, like, coffee machines at home,
I was going to
right?
say, like the kitchen.
The kitchen, coffee machines, and the rise of the Nespresso, but also all the other fancy coffee machines we now have in our homes and our offices. And so as a futurist, what I often do is I'll look for those, what we call signals from the future. What's emerging today that we think might become mainstream in the future? I'll give you an example from the wine industry because I got a question this morning. So we know that millennials don't drink as much as baby boomers, okay? And when I read a lot of the board papers from one of the companies that I was working with last year, you could see that for maybe 10 years, they thought, don't worry, millennials will grow into it. As they get older, they'll drink more. And it's turned out they haven't. And I'm hearing some of the same discussion around the Gen Zs. Gen Zs drink very, very little. And they're not looking like they're going to grow into it if we look at millennials as an example. And so coming back to the boardroom, I think what we often do is we have blind spots. And those blind spots, it's as if the world today will continue forever, or if the world today isn't the way I want it to be, that the way I like it will somehow come back after whatever crisis it is over. And that's not the way that I think as a futurist.
It's quite profound, isn't it, when you think if you have a big wine industry conglomerate and someone comes up like you and say, actually, in 10, 20 years, your wine is not going to be drank as much as you think. So you need to shift how you do your winemaking. And it's a big shock because you're like, well, what do I do?
Well, I want to talk about shocks because I feel like what happens is the inverse. If we don't do these 10-year views, we have our boardrooms sitting there going, I'm shocked. I'm shocked that climate change is happening. I'm shocked that supply chains are disrupted. I'm shocked at the price of petroleum. I'm shocked that there's a war on. And so boards that don't take the time to really take those 10-year views, I feel like they ping-pong around from shock to shock. All of those shocks were able to be predicted. All of those shocks were predicted.
Wow, really?
Yeah, even the pandemic. We've had report after report that said one was coming. We didn't know specifically what the virus would be. We knew it was coming. So that's where I think boards can protect themselves from shocks if they're willing to take on some of this futurist thinking.
And so let's figure out what a smart street smart futurist is. So it's an it's an interesting term. I've never really understood what street smart futurism is, but what is it really, in your own words?
I'm really commercial. I've founded a number of businesses. I've been CEO of a number of businesses. I sit in boardrooms, which means that I'm willing to carry the questions and the decisions that we make. And so for me, street smart is I've got scar tissue, I've got a bit of dirt under my nails, I'm willing to roll my sleeves up and really figure something out, and I'm willing to be responsible for the decisions that the company makes. I see quite a lot of futurists who are basically doing sci-fi. And so they're imagining a future and then they're being very inspiring about what that future might look like, with your robot and whatever else. And I think they're useful because they drag our thinking in a particular direction. So I follow a lot of other futurists. But street smart bit for me is, that's fine, but we have to make decisions on this. We've got to put our money down. If we're going to put our money down and under conditions of great uncertainty, how do we feel okay about making those bets?
We are when it comes to you need to make a decision on where to put your money in and where to put your focus. And is this where you distinguish yourself amongst all the other futurists that are there? There's a number of futurists out there who are doing great work, having great conversations. But being street smart is an interesting term, and is where the boardroom, if you feel like this is where you belong. And
it is. I think coming back to the boards that I like being on when you have a family-owned business or a founder-driven business, the investment cycle is quite fast. What we call the clock speed of the business is quite fast. I remember when I was a founder and I had to make a decision about investing in a really big tech turnaround, like change program in the business that I owned. And I remember thinking, yes. And the reason that I could go yes was it was my house on the line. It was my retained earnings on the line. It was my dividend. It was my profit on the line. And so I could make decisions quite fast. When we see large corporates often find it really difficult to make those big decisions. And it's not just that there's layers and layers of decision making, but also when a listed company makes a decision to do a big investment or to change direction, even if it is the right thing to do, the share market almost always hammers them. And so the share market almost encourages businesses to be what they might think is risk averse, so cautious. And in my world, it's the riskiest thing they could do is to do nothing. But often the share market rewards them for doing nothing. So there's some of these things at play. And coming back to being street smart, when I work with listed companies, then I have that empathy for, okay, how is the board going to look if the share price tanks? Even though they may have made the right decision to do the right thing. And so we need to understand like all of those dynamics of business. That's where I fit as a futurist. Coming back, I love reading all the other futurists, and I love reading the people who are stretching my brain in big ways. And if they weren't there, maybe I couldn't do my job as well as I do. But I'm interested in this, particularly the 10-year window that we can affect. We can look, if you're a business, if you're a construction company right now, you're a developer, you're actually making a 30-year bet on how people live, not just building a building. Or if we're putting roads around New Zealand or a second harbour bridge, we're making a bet about what we think transport looks like in 30 years.
Or can you tell us what you think the bet was made when we had the City Rail link in Auckland?
I don't know, but we do know that public transport makes sense, for across the world. I'm not close enough in Auckland to know how that went.
Yeah.
But I'll give you a different example.
Give me a different example.
Which is that I sat on the board of the Electric Vehicle Fund for ECA. So this is electricity efficiency, public money invested in trying to electrify the New Zealand economy. When I left, I said to the chair, look, there was one thing I just really regretted that we didn't do. She's like, what is that? And I said, we've put a huge amount of money, us, private companies, councils, government, we've put lots of money into charging stations for cars all over New Zealand. And she's like, yep. And I think that's a good idea because we do see the electrification of the fleet is coming. And this is probably 6-7 years ago we had this conversation. I said, but there's one other thing as a futurist that I believe is inevitable, and that is autonomous vehicles. That autonomous vehicles are not a pie-in-the-sky thing. They are going to be on our roads, and as soon as the regulatory regime allows them, we will have autonomous vehicles. We don't have a single electric car charger in New Zealand that is designed for an autonomous vehicle. Every car charger we've put in the country requires a human to get out and plug it in. And that technology has been around for about 10 years. And this is what I mean about we build the past, like we think we're designing for the future. We took one step into the future, which was the electrification of the New Zealand car fleet. But we didn't do the second step, which is, well, what will a car actually look like in 10 years' time?
Very interesting. And is that the limitation of people's thinking?
Yeah.
And accessibility to people like yourselves, or
yeah,
having to clone you maybe?
Maybe, but I'm happy to train people. I love training people to think like this.
Yeah, exactly. Because it takes a skill to think differently. And the question is our leader, are there our leaders, our governments are thinking that way?
Some of them are, and I think this is where the government used to do, well, for a while was doing these things called LTIBs, long-term insights briefings. And I love those because it was an opportunity for government departments to dream about where 10 years out might be without it having to be policy. Somewhere like Finland has had, for over 40 years, Finland has had a government agency that is responsible for the future of Finland. And that government agency works with all government departments to make sure that they're building the future into everything they do.
So why aren't we doing that here?
I don't know. Wales has a commissioner for future generations. And so they have, like we have, say, the Climate Commission or the Commissioner for the Environment, they have a commission for future generations. And this commissioner has input into road design, into hospital investment, into thinking about big bits of public policy and whether the children of today and the young people of today have been taken into account for how they will live.
Yeah.
So they've been instrumental in putting cycle paths in, for example.
So the next question I really want to ask is, can you teach us how to think like you?
Yeah, totally. I learnt, right? So the reason I'm certified is that I've done a bunch of courses around the world with different institutions, training institutions and different futurist institutes and how to think like a futurist. And I do teach a one-day program where I teach the basic skills. And I also run workshops, with senior teams or with boards where we'll look at signals, which I mentioned are like things that exist today that might turn into the future. We'll think about drivers of change, which are also what are called megatrends, or the big forces that are changing society or the world around us. And then a couple of different ways of doing scenarios. So
Sounds
you
like
can
a superpower.
use that. It is a superpower, but it's not something, it's not like the power of prophecy. It's not like I was born with that. This is a superpower of being able to take a series of skills and tools and use those in daily life, which is why I think that anyone who's interested can train to do this.
Hello, thanks for watching this video. Quick note, have you subscribed? Over 90% of people who are watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify or on Apple are not subscribed or following. Please do so now. It's so simple. The button will be around the screen somewhere. You either hit subscribe or hit the follow button or leave me a review. It will help me so much, helps me grow as a channel and support my work. So I really appreciate it. Okay, back to the episode. Could you give us a little teaser of if I would come to you and say, I don't know, big company, and I'd like to think long term. Perhaps I might have you on my board at some point, but for now I want to help me teach my staff how to think big, and not maybe just big, how to think in 10 years time and how people operate, the consumer, the economy. Do I even need to think about the economy? I don't know. What would you first
What would I do?
Yeah.
Often a typical engagement for me might be a keynote first. So it might be a keynote at the conference, or it might be just a session with the board or a session with the senior team. And I might take them through what I see as the future of their sector. So it could be the future of wine. It could be the future of transport. It could be the future of energy. It could be the future of the kitchen. And so often what I'll do quite a lot of research, and I'll look at who else is thinking about this, what people are designing, where is the bleeding edge of people in the sector. And then I might start it with the biggest picture, which is these drivers of change. So we can't ignore climate change. We've known about it for a very long time. So thinking about climate change, and let's say it's the future of the kitchen, what has climate change got to do with the kitchen? It's got a lot to do with energy use. So people are, in the future, if we're looking for lower and lower energy appliances, we might also be wanting them, if we're living in Europe and it's hot, we want them to give off as least heat as possible. So start to think about, how do we live in a world in 10 years' time where climate has more of an impact on us than it does today? The next one that we might think about is demographics. So in New Zealand, the median age for non-Māori is around 50. So it's about 54. So half of non-Māori New Zealanders are over or under 54 years old. And Pākehā New Zealanders, non-Māori New Zealanders are not having a lot of children. The birth rate is under replacement. And so then you might have a conversation and go, will they age out? Like, what are they going to be doing in 10 or 20 years' time? And a 50-year-old today is younger than a 50-year-old was 20 years ago in terms of their attitude, the way they live, the supplements they take, the exercise, like all of that. So we could think, well, in 20 years' time, they're going to be 70. They're probably going to be 70-year-olds who are still traveling, who are still working, who are still drinking coffee, who are still going out dancing, a bunch of things. So we can't look at 70-year-olds from 10 years ago and go, that's what a 70-year-old will look like in the future. So the other bit of this is that Māori, they are having children and they are continuing to have children more than replacement. And on top of that, their median age is in the early 20s. So half of Māori in New Zealand are under or over 20. So if I was an employer, I'd be thinking, how do I get Māori to come and work for me? Because that's where the workforce is in the future in New Zealand, unless we do something and bring in lots of immigrants. And so that's where that thinking, for example, so a kitchen company, I might be thinking, is there something different around how Māori cook or how Māori live that maybe I could design for the future of a Māori kitchen? And we know that they're going to have bigger families, they're much more likely to be multi-generational, so maybe they need a bigger oven. Whereas maybe today's Gen Zs who are Pākehā may never marry, may end up renting for the rest of their lives. So they don't want big kitchen appliances. They want something that's like an air fryer combined with a convection oven, combined with a microwave, combined with a steam, combined with something else that they can pick up and take from flat to flat, and they're not having to get a moving truck. And so you can see that it's not like there's one future. The future can be very different for a 26-year-old Pākehā woman and for a 26-year-old Māori woman in New Zealand in terms of the way they might live in 10 or 20 years' time. So we need to think about that in order to be able to put our investments in.
Very interesting, because so how we act now is, do you think, is what we're going to be acting in 10 years?
I don't think we do. I think we look back. And that's why what we do is we go, everyone's got a coffee machine, so we should have a Me Too coffee machine. Rather than necessarily thinking, I wonder what people will be doing with their coffee.
Because how can you predict what people will be doing?
Well, you can predict it often, this idea. So I've talked about the mega trends, and they might be things like demographics or climate. Then we might look at signals and we might go, what are people having in their coffee today that they didn't have in the past? So we could look at the rise of plant milks, right? We can look at dairy, obviously. And for adults around the world, pretty much the only thing that is driving adult consumption of dairy milk is coffee. Like, you think about it, adults don't sit around and have a glass of milk, but they actually did 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
They mostly now it's the latte that drives adult milk consumption.
If it wasn't for coffee, people wouldn't be drinking milk.
That's what I think.
Gotcha.
However, interestingly, people are eating more cheese. So it's not like they're not having any dairy. They've just moved their consumption.
From milk only.
To
milk and coffee only.
Yeah, to milk with coffee is where they drink their milk.
So it's how do you design the milk to make it more palatable? Have you seen the special barista milk?
Yeah, barista milk. Don't you think? I just think that's genius. And we see the rise of lactose-free milk. We see obviously all of the different, and you go to the States and there's probably more than 20 different kinds of plant-based milk available in the supermarket. Pumpkin milk, potato milk, like macadamia milk, almond milk, all those milks. So we see those products.
And is this why they made them, do you think?
Oh, totally.
Okay.
And then the other thing that I see is, I remember the first time I went up to one of those hole-in-the-wall coffee places and they asked me if I wanted a collagen shot in my coffee. And so we also see...
I'm a bit surprised because I've never heard of a collagen shot.
So we see people putting things in their coffee. So we see them putting collagen creamers, truly. Or we see them putting creatine in their coffee because it doesn't taste very nice, and so you put it in the coffee. Or people putting their supplements in their morning coffee. They used to put them in their morning juice.
Wow.
But, people don't drink as much juice now. Yeah. Right? It's too high in sugar.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's where some of these... Yeah. I'm curious. I'm curious what might be in your coffee. We see all those mushroom supplements now that we never used to see, right? Yeah. Ashwagandha has obviously been around for like centuries, maybe millennia, but it's now in the supermarkets, you know, the turmeric lattes. Like, so we could start to look at some of these and think, well, I wonder what's next. Where's the next frontier for what people might want to put in their coffee?
I think every company needs to have you in there.
So I'm going to come back to your question about training, because we might start with those big mega trends. Then we might think about these very specific things.
It's a very important skill to have.
It is, but it's mostly curiosity and noticing. And most of us, I think, notice weird stuff, but we don't think
how do you
the
connect
next
the
question.
Yeah.
Where will that go? And what if we put 3 of these ideas together? And then the next piece that, if I've got a day with them, I'll often work on is there are 2 kinds of scenarios that I like to work with, and there's a whole different methodologies for these. But one is where you take 2 drivers of change and put them together and then create 4 kinds of options for how the world might come out.
What do you mean by drivers of change?
So those mega trends, I'll give you an example. I had a day with about 50 librarians from Christchurch City Library recently.
Wow.
And we did this. We did signals, and we did drivers of change, and then I got them to create some scenarios. And so, for example, high trust in technology versus low trust in technology would be one of the drivers. And we can see both playing out in the world. That somebody like me, I'm like, yeah, I'll put into AI and I'll use these tools, and I've got a lot of technology in my world, right? Then there are a lot of people who are like, I don't want a cash-free society. I don't believe in vaccines. I don't want to be tracked and monitored. I'm going to turn the GPS on my phone off. Like, you see both at the same time. And then we did another. So if you could think about that being a vertical axis, and then a horizontal axis, we thought about social isolation. And we've seen a rise of social isolation. But at the same time, we've also seen a rise of people joining clubs and communities and going out dancing. And so they both exist in the real world. And if you put that together, what you can get is a world where there's high trust and a lot of community activities, where there's a lot of community activities and low trust, where there's low trust and social isolation, and where there's social isolation and high trust. And then what we can do is we can really imagine those 4 worlds. We could put, like, what would it be like to be a librarian or a library in a world where there's a lot of social isolation and very low trust in technology? And we can imagine that. And then what we can do is we could design products for a world like that.
Oh, I see.
Do you see? And at the same time, we could imagine what would it be like in a world where there's very high trust in technology and a lot of community activities. What might that world look like? And then how could we design our services and products for that? And if you do all 4 of these, what a board can then do, or senior managers can do, is think, how do we be resilient for however the world turns out? Most organisations, when I ask them, they have one that is the one that's their favourite, the world they would really like, the bias one. And what I see is boards can't help themselves, but they write a strategy for the world they really want, not a strategy for the world that turns out completely differently or badly. And so this is where this resilience comes in, and being willing to have very robust conversations, because it's another way of exposing blind spots. It's also a way of exposing opportunities.
So fascinating, isn't it?
It's so fascinating. Like, you can see why I love it. Like, I truly love it. And I also kind of think I'm glad I didn't find it until I was later in my career, because now I've got scar tissue and the experience to be able to use it. And I think that if I was trying to do this straight from school, I just don't think I would have had the wisdom, I guess is the word, but the kind of curiosity and the experience to be able to stand up and kind of go, you know what? Sometimes not knowing is actually what we want. Boards like certainty.
Yeah.
But we might be better in the not knowing and be willing to maybe we should make 3 small bets than 1 big bet here.
Yeah.
And then if one of those turns out to be a good idea, let's double down on that.
Yeah, it's so valuable. So the scars that you were talking about.
Yeah.
I know there's a plural in there. So,
Yeah.
but we're not going to get into all of them. But I'd love a snapshot of what you've been involved in and some of the cool achievements that you've been part of.
Look, I was lucky enough to learn to code in high school, and so I've been using this technology for a lot longer than most of my peers. And, I think about this idea of digital natives versus digital immigrants. In some ways, even though I'm older, I'm more of a digital native than many of my peers in the boardroom. So because I learnt to code in 1979, right?
Wow.
So a long time ago. And then in the 80s, I was working on these early thinking on mainframes about AI. Back then we were calling it big data, and we were trying to do what we called predictive analytics, and later we're doing machine learning, and later we called it neural networks, and now we're working with these LLMs. I'm still working with neural networks, which I'm not going to go into. It's another way of thinking about AI. So a lot of these old ways of thinking about AI are still in use. They're just in use in data or in different places. And I guess too, what that's meant is that I ended up in a career in software which wasn't initially my intention, mostly because I saw real world problems I wanted to solve and data could solve them. So I started a company in my bedroom in the early 90s that analysed ACC's data and looked for a couple of things. I was looking for how companies could improve their health and safety using that data. I was also looking for how we could improve treatment outcomes by using that data. And so in the 90s, I was the biggest consumer of my company. I grew quite a large company that used that data to help employers around New Zealand to manage their workers' compensation claims. And built it on the back of software that we wrote. Back then, by 1998, I launched with Royal Sun Alliance, which is now part of the Vero Group, and Southern Cross Healthcare here in New Zealand. We launched a company called Fusion, and that was an insurance company that was completely run on AI. So in 1998, and it was complicated back then. We didn't have like the LLM tools that we have now. We used to have to write like 1 million lines of code to like make a decision. Every Wednesday morning, the team and I would get together and we would rewrite a whole lot of the decision-making code. So I'll tell you what I meant by that. So if someone put a claim into us, like an insurance claim, we had done the data analysis on this, and we realised it was cheaper to accept every single claim than to have a human go through and decide whether it was valid or not. Now, that was based entirely on data. It just saved us so much money. Like an average claim back then was $27, and it cost $50 to decide whether that claim was valid. But because ACC was worried about paying money to the wrong people, they would rather spend the $50 to save the $27. Whereas from a data freak point of view, I looked at it and I was like, I'd rather save the $27 to save the $50.
Yeah.
And so we also then, over the next couple of years, worked out like which doctors were any good, how to pay them without having a human involved, how to automate as much of the business as possible. The AI decided who should get a case manager and who should just have their costs paid for, which case manager that claim should go to, whether or not there was fraud, like all of that stuff.
Wow.
So we cranked that out. Those of you who've been around a long time, you'll know that we got a change of government in 2000, and they made it illegal for us to compete with ACC. And so pretty much overnight, it wasn't illegal for us to offer the service. It was illegal to buy anything from us.
Wow.
And so we had a
That sucks.
$190 million business, had to close it down. I know, but that's what I mean about scar tissue, right?
Oh, okay.
Grown this thing. It was my baby. Took it from my bedroom to multiple floors in Simon Street and offices in Wellington and Christchurch and, all of that.
Wow.
So, and then sadly, I would say that the industry at the time didn't understand, and we didn't have the language to explain really what it was that we were doing.
What you're describing now is pretty much like a AI software system for this day and age.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. We were looking...
But you were doing like 98.
But I was doing it in the 90s, and that's that thing about designing for the future. And we weren't...
You're 30 years too early.
Yeah, and there's sometimes, and this is the street smart bit, I don't think that there's any advantage in being too early. So this is the tricky bit for boards, the line they have to walk, is we can see that the future is inevitable sometimes. There are going to be autonomous cars in New Zealand. Should we invest in autonomous charges or not? Now, we didn't actually get to ask that question, because when I tried to ask that question, there wasn't much palate for it, However, this is where investing 30 years ahead of the market, you often lose your money. And what we see is that there's usually second mover advantage, not first mover advantage. The second generation to do something usually makes the money. They say that, the second mouse gets the cheese, right? And so I think, there's no benefit sometimes in being first. And I had to learn that the hard way.
Yeah, exactly. Because you've lost the business overnight.
We lost the business pretty much overnight. We wound it down, laid everybody off, sold the remnants to Southern Cross, and they didn't really understand what they'd bought, and they closed that software down.
What happened to the software now?
It's gone.
Has anyone built something similar? Or?
I think there are now lots of tools that are in use, and they're better. Let's be clear. Like, we were using old technology to do that, so it was cutting edge at the time.
Yeah.
If I was to do it today, we would do it much faster, and it would be quite different. But we've also, I see that a lot of the data analytics are still not as far ahead as they could be in some industries. I think that, I've sat on another insurance company board here in New Zealand, and we could not get the data that I would have thought was useful. We insured people's mortgages, and what would have been great would have been to have a flag come to us, as soon as somebody started looking on the internet for a mortgage broker. Like, we could have started marketing to them that moment, for example. I think there's still a lot of data and a lot of tools out there that companies aren't using today but have been around for 30 years. Yeah.
So what else have you been involved in that hopefully wasn't
I started a computer gaming company. I've had some successes too.
Yeah.
I
want to
some
hear
huge
about the
successes. But, I started a computer gaming company in the 90s. Not in the 90s, in the 2000s, which was called Mini Monos. And there were, at the time, Club Penguin was a thing. I don't know if you remember Club Penguin, but Club Penguin, Disney bought it for about $600 million. And I looked at Club Penguin and I looked around. I had a small child at the time, and I could see that what she was doing on the internet was very much using her as a consumer. And like, probably the debates we're now having about whether children should be on social media or not, it was the early days of all of that. And I could see just how much toy companies and others were marketing to children, and also the social media companies. And so I started what was fundamentally a games platform come social network for greenie kids who cared about the environment. And it cranked. It was sort of Club Penguin meets the inconvenient truth. And we had, like, it was amazing. Had 1.5 million users. We had little kids. And one month we had something like 15,000 kids do real world environmental actions that we rewarded them for online.
Wow.
We had kids coming up and turning up to parties. We really protected them heavily from predators, and worked closely with police services around the world in terms of like referring anybody that we thought was potentially a problem, really locking people out, shutting kids, in terms of like making it very safe for kids to be with each other and to play. It was fundamentally about play, but with an environmental message. What was kind of curious was 2012. So we're cranking along, grew really fast. A slow month was sort of a 30% month-on-month growth, like huge growth.
Wow.
And then in Christmas 2011-12, what happened is that the iPad Mini came out. And the iPad Mini was the first time that toy sales dropped in the history of anyone collecting data on toy sales, because the iPad Mini wasn't considered a toy. And the same Christmas, the Kindle Fire came out, and that wasn't considered to be a toy. But those two things ended up being the number one Christmas presents for children around the world. And we know they were Christmas presents because they were bought in December and they were activated on the 25th or 26th of December. And they completely changed the way that kids played. So both of those went to apps, and these what were called MMOs, these big virtual worlds for kids, within a year, all of them had gone bankrupt. So when we didn't go bankrupt, we did a solvent liquidation, but us, Habbo Hotel, Club Penguin itself was closed. There were lots of them. And we tried making a pivot to apps, but it just wasn't the value proposition that our kids had come to us for. They'd come largely to hang out with other kids. And so I just, it was, what's the right word? It was very sobering to be someone who I really felt like I understood technology, but what I hadn't seen was sort of a change in the whole platform. And that has been very useful. I've never let myself be caught out like that again. And then that's where I think that scar tissue is so useful. And in the end, I convinced our board that we needed to close because we'd gone from this massive growth. Nickelodeon lost 40% of its viewership in January that year. And it was largely because that's when kids across the world moved to streaming instead of watching live TV, because they now had a device they could stream off. And so those big changes, sometimes we don't see them coming. And that's where I guess for me, I later trained as a futurist, but I kind of just got very curious about how I didn't see these shifts coming. And that was probably one of the biggest influences in why I retrained later.
You've been hit hard twice and almost took you by surprise, and you were blindsided to some extent. And I feel like, would it be right in saying that you don't want anyone else to go through that?
I don't.
Yeah,
and
it's too
I think
painful.
The boards I'm on, I really don't want those founders or those families that have invested heavily to go through the same thing. Like, for me, what drives me is, how do we stay in business forever? How do you stay in business forever? And if it's farming, how do we farm forever? And that's quite different than just perhaps the next quarter's earnings. And that's where I think you do need people who are focused on next quarter's earnings, because if you don't make next quarter's earnings, you don't have the right to think about the future. But I also think if you don't think about the future, then next quarter's earnings are going to be a threat and you're going to be too late.
One time you talked to me about a company that you built into, is it the millions? Was it one of these two that you had? Yeah. So what do you think New Zealand is going to look like in 2040? I'm sure you've done a lot of research and study and looking into. Perhaps you can tell us about agriculture as well, because this is an area that you particularly enjoy and feel passionate about.
I'm going to start with climate change.
Yeah, please.
Because I think we have to really think about what is happening globally and locally. And NIWA has been putting out, so NIWA is it's now not called that, I can't remember what it's called now. But NIWA was a government research agency that's been around for about 40 years and in various forms. And they put out these amazing long-term projections of New Zealand's climate and weather. And they've pretty much been on the money. And so what we know is that New Zealand is both getting hotter and wetter, and that we can expect higher and higher winds. And that does seem to be playing out. And then on top of that, we see that those conditions, hotter and wetter and windier, means that we can expect more pests to be here that are currently in Australia because they will blow across the Pacific. And so an example would be, dengue fever and malaria, I think, will be fairly endemic in New Zealand in 20 years if we don't, or 15 years if we don't do something about both climate change and about how we think about diseases. And so somewhere like Nelson is just like a really cozy, lovely spot for dengue fever to break out. And so I believe that we're in pandemic century. We're going to have more and more pandemics. Those pandemics will partly be climate related, like a dengue fever. They'll also be travel related. And so we expect to live in a world where we're very connected. We move around very quickly. It was part of why COVID was able to get around the world so fast. And a lot of people were comparing it to, the big flu epidemic in the 1900s or 1912 or whenever it was, 1915 back then. But the thing about that was that people came on ships, and that was how they moved the pandemic around with the flu pandemic. And a lot of people either died or had recovered by the time they got to wherever they were going. With aeroplane travel, you may not know that you've got a highly transmissible disease because you leave somewhere, you're somewhere else in 12 hours in another country, and you're not even yet showing symptoms, but you're already contagious. So that way we live, and this is why the way we live matters so much as we think about the future. So pandemics are going to grow. The other bit related to agriculture is that pandemics will grow because we're expanding animal agriculture into places that those animals haven't been before. So
what do you mean?
Okay, so when we come back to coronaviruses, which is what the COVID pandemic was, there's about another sort of 200 or 300 coronaviruses inside bat species around the world. So bats are a mammal. We're putting cattle into areas that used to be rainforest, and they're another mammal. And they're not mammals that traditionally have hung out together. And so the likelihood of us like mowing down some rainforest and the bats and the cattle coexisting, and the cattle now catching a disease that lives in bats, we're doing pretty much all we can to try and encourage what we call these novel zoonoses, these animal diseases, to cross into different species. Now, for it to go from a bat to a cow is not that hard. For it to go from a cow to a human is not that hard, because we're also mammals and we're in close proximity with them if we're farming. And so, we've got this discussion at the moment around H1N1, around the avian flus that are flying around. We've had a lot of cattle workers in the US who have caught the avian flu. So the cows have caught it from wild birds, and then in the milking sheds, the agricultural workers have caught it from the cows. And so you just start to see that we'll see more and more of that. Obviously, we're seeing Ebola take off in Africa at the moment. So that's the not cheerful stuff. I think we're going to see worse weather patterns. We're going to see more pandemics. On the other side, I think we're going to see cheaper power, cheaper than we've ever imagined. So we can see the proliferation of solar. We see increased wind. We see it's now cheaper to invest in solar and to build the solar and run it than it is just to run a coal-fired power station. And so we're going to see cheaper energy become available for more and more things. And that encourages us to do more manufacturing, more precision agriculture, more high-tech everything. So I'm really excited about that. So while on one hand, I think there are some things that are not so great, climate change, death of a bunch of species, pandemics, I think that the opportunity for us to have cheaper power is a great thing. The other one is that we see expansion of vaccines, and we're seeing all kinds of new exciting vaccines. And I think vaccines are I'm not pro or anti, but the vaccines that work have really changed the face of lifetime survival for a lot of diseases. Kids are dying from measles at the moment, but for a long time they didn't. I could go on, but how's like those are some things that I'm thinking about what does New Zealand look like in 2040? I think we've got a strong agricultural base. I think that you'll be hard pressed to find a farm that doesn't run on solar power. I think that our tractors will be autonomous, running on solar power. We will be massively reducing our pesticide use because those tractors will have machine vision on them and they'll just be laser zapping weeds, and we won't be needing to use the pesticides that we are. I think that New Zealand's got a solid future in clean, delicious, nutritious food for the planet. So I guess that's part of what I see in 2040. I also see that our population becomes more brown in all forms, becomes more Māori than it is now. And then I think that when we look at where immigrants will come from, I think that we have to expect greater and greater ethnic diversity in New Zealand as we will bring immigration back up a bit over today's levels in order to compensate for our lack of birth rate. So there's a few things.
The way that New Zealand looks in 2040, is it good? Is it good?
I think it's good.
Good vibes or kind of scared?
Look, I'm a Pollyanna, so I always think that it's good. There are things that we're going to have to address as a country, and I don't want this, I'm not being political about this, but disparities in wealth are never good long-term. Countries that have high disparities in wealth run into big social cohesion issues. We have to do that. We're not necessarily investing in the kind of education that you would invest in for 2040. So, we think about the countries that have national standards, for example, they tend to teach to the test, and the test is knowledge from the past. It's not the creation of new knowledge. So, Einstein says, imagination is more important than knowledge. And what he means by that is you do need to know some stuff, but you don't solve problems by knowing stuff. You solve problems by imagining possibilities. And so, I think I look for where there are pockets of that happening in our education system, and there are.
Yeah.
So that's the things. I'm actually super cheerful about the ethnic diversity. I think that will bring us new resilience. It will bring us new ideas, new food, new ways of being integrated with the world too. Because we tend to, my ancestors came from Scotland and Europe and at the sort of beginning of New Zealand as opposed to, Māori. But once Pākehā started coming in, we tend to look to where we came from for trade or where we came from for knowledge. And so if we can expand that and we start to look to India or to Iran or to, to China or to South America for different kinds of knowledge bases or for trade, I think that's something to look forward to.
I want to know if we need to do certain things as a country to be ready for that and whilst still living in the day and now. And a separate question maybe is economy, because all of that you're describing, I don't know, will impact economies. Like COVID impacted our economy, the war impacted economy, and I wonder, what do you see like futurists look into the bigger picture, like the geo. I don't want to talk into politics because we're not really a political podcast, but it will have an impact on the future. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, two really big questions, which I got lost in right now. I can't even remember the first one I asked. But maybe just can you go a bit higher, into your bird's eye view? What do you see New Zealand? How do you see New Zealand? Okay, then the question was, what do we need to do to be ready for the 2040 picture? Yeah. And then we'll get into the economy afterwards.
I think what we need to do to get ready for the 2040 picture is to embrace almost yes and. And so what I mean by that is I told that story earlier about perhaps what a 26-year-old non-Māori person who's going to rent and what their life might be like and what they might want from a kitchen versus a Māori 26-year-old who's got an extended family and is having, more people over for dinner on a regular basis and owns their own home. And so I think one of the big things we need to do to get ready for the future is to really be willing to embrace that there isn't one future, just like there isn't one present. And so if we can be better at dealing with ambiguity and complexity, then I think that we have a very solid future ahead of us. If we want to live in certainty, we're really in trouble, because certainty was kind of useful post-industrial revolution. So for pretty much 200 years of the manufacturing and agricultural-based economy, certainty was their friend. And really in the digital era, it's not just that it becomes a knowledge economy, but actually it becomes an uncertainty and complexity economy. And so if I could do one thing only that would help people be ready for the future, it would be to have more wonder, more curiosity, and to be really willing to have less certainty.
That's really profound. And it's really helpful in other areas of life that I can think of. But it's really helpful advice. Maybe we can finish on the economy, because this is what everyone is thinking. And then that's my most viewed episodes have been about the economy. People want to dig deeper. What do you make of what's going on right now? And is it looking good?
I think it's just, so this is me being curious, and I'm not an expert.
From your own viewish.
From my own view, I'm fascinated by our current debate in New Zealand around debt. It seems like we've got very caught in a story about whether debt is, or that debt is bad. And so we, and I see this across most political parties at the moment, that there's this conversation that we've got to get the deficit down. I think we need to stop for a minute and wonder what it is that we're trying to achieve. So from a business point of view, I'm really willing to borrow to create the future we want. So during COVID, the meat company board I was on, we decided to put $1 million into a new grind line. Now that may seem like a weird segue, but we decided that we saw more and more Americans were buying mince. They call that grind in the States.
Yeah.
And they were under financial pressure. So we thought, well, what if we could take some of our lamb and make more lamb mince? Could we convince them to buy lamb mince, not just beef mince? Anyway, it turned out to be a brilliant, we didn't know, but the pandemic went on for longer than we thought. We got a fantastic payback. And now we use that line to make mince for other people. We make meatballs for ourselves and other people. We make patties for ourselves and other people. And it turned out that borrowing, in a sense, like putting that money down on something that we weren't sure about, turned out to be a great investment for the company's future, and has created us a whole new line of business that we weren't expecting. So, and this is where, as a country, and I don't think countries operate like businesses, but I feel like we've lost this idea that maybe we need to invest today for the future of the country. So very few countries in the OECD have debt as low as us. And yet New Zealand's conversation is that we're a high debt country. But actually, when you do the international comparisons, our debt is very low. And so as a curious person and not as an economist, I wonder if that lack of debt will put the brakes on our economy for the long term. And I don't know, but I'm curious about it. And then the second one is that if we allow our education system to be driven by an ideology that feels old, then we also could end up putting a handbrake on our economy in the future. So I'd like to see us be really clear about investing in STEAM. So and that means that it includes arts and creativity, not just science and tech. And I'm not saying we're doing just that, but I feel like we're not, schools have had a lot of their creativity programs defunded. We see that the opportunity for young people to go to an orchestra or to play in an orchestra or any of those things, they are really under threat at the moment. Having sat on a board like Weta, that business makes its money out of creativity. It is a very substantial business. And so, both Weta Workshop and Weta Digital, Peter Jackson's company, they live on the back of creativity. And so if we underfund those, we could find that our economy stalls in ways that we're not expecting. I think agriculture has got a really solid, fantastic future. And I think that New Zealand farmers have always been quite well educated. They've gone to Massey or they've gone to Lincoln. They may have only done a diploma or they may have done degrees in agronomy. But it's meant that our farmers tend to embrace technology quite quickly, and technology here might be the electric fence halter, which is a New Zealand business that has just got $1 billion investment in it. That does what I call Fitbits for cows, so we've got a really strong future in high-tech farming. And that's not the same as saying that it's intensive. I think that's quite important. We've got a real ability to do farming that works with the planet, with the climate we're going to be in, and that provides very high quality food. So I think that the rural economy is still going to be the backbone of New Zealand in 2040, and we need to make sure that it is. But that's not the same as saying that then they should be allowed to pollute our water or our rivers or our air or whatever. Yeah. I don't, if we take that view of can we farm forever, then I see a lot of really great farmers on their catchment committees doing water restoration, doing land restoration. So I think that that's a big chunk of our economy going forward is still going to be in food production.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. And gosh, I feel like I've got another 50 questions to ask.
I'll come back.
Oh yeah, please, you have to have another round too. I would love to know, how can people reach out to you, ask questions, or ask you, I don't know, just teach them how to be good at future predictors. I definitely want to be good at that. So
I'm pretty busy on LinkedIn, and so follow me on LinkedIn if you want some mind-blowing, interesting things that are going on around the world. And I'm super easy to find, Melissa Clark-Reynolds, and then I have melissaclarkreynolds.com, and you can contact me through that website. But those are probably the two easiest ways for people to find me.
Fantastic. And I highly encourage people to do so. What's your final thought as a very smart, very street smart futurist with a few scars? What's your final thing to tell people?
I think my final thing is this, again, the idea that there isn't one future out there. And I regularly find myself saying the present is messy and contradictory, and the future will be too. And I think if we can embrace that the future will be messy and contradictory, there'll be rich people, there'll be poor people, there'll be vegans, there'll be carnivores. We can't just decide that we want one of them to be the way the future turns out and then we'll only create for that. We need to be really resilient in the era that we're in. And that resilience will come from embracing that messy and contradictory.
Very cool. Really wise words. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you again on the podcast very soon.
Great questions. Really enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome.